And therefore, I think you have a problem. I think that loss of public opinion, what struck me from your autobiography was how subtly and for how long you have understood this. You know that political power comes from public opinion, and you know that you need to win the battle of public opinion, and you're losing it.
For months, world leaders and major media outlets danced around the issue. But this time, someone finally looked Benjamin Netanyahu directly in the eye and said what millions around the world have been thinking. Welcome back to Pillarism. Tonight, we are breaking down a tense UK interview where Netanyahu faces sharp criticism over Gaza, civilian casualties, public opinion, and accusations that Israel is losing the moral argument globally. And as the pressure builds, the conversation quickly turns explosive. Let's get into it.
Prime Minister, that is one way of viewing the world, and I have some sympathy with some of what you've said. Let me give you another way, which is that many people around the world see the state of Israel as a country that is exclusively using military force, that has killed 70,000 people in Gaza, that is doing nothing to create a sustainable future for people there. That is a country, you've been accused of being a war criminal. That if you went to go to several countries in Europe, you're going to get arrested. This is not just mad campus radicalism. This is a feeling around the world. You said it yourself to us just now. In public opinion around the world, Israel is doing very poorly. And it's doing very poorly because people see a country that is behaving in a way that is not compatible with being a liberal democracy. And therefore, I think you have a problem. I think that loss of public opinion, what struck me from your autobiography was how subtly and for how long you have understood this. You know that political power comes from public opinion, and you know that you need to win the battle of public opinion, and you're losing it. You've absolutely lost it in Europe, but much more worryingly for you, you're losing it in America. And I think that what you've just told me about fanaticism is true in part, but it is not going to shape public opinion. People are going to roll their eyes and say he's saying that anybody who says anything critical about Israel is anti-Semitic. He's giving this large, this story about fanaticism, and he's not accepting the fact that Israel is behaving in a way that we think is incompatible with the kind of liberal democracy that he claims.
Well, the liberal democracies that fought the battles from World War II to Afghanistan to Iraq and so on, the ratio of combatants to non-combatants killed was 6-1, 7-1. In Gaza, because Hamas was forcing people to stay in urban areas at gunpoint, the ratio is about 1.5-1. And we lost a lot of soldiers because we didn't carpet bomb. We didn't do it.
Prime Minister.
We didn't do.
People have different ratios as well.
I'm telling you, you don't actually, but that's not the point. It certainly wasn't 6-1 or 7-1, and we certainly didn't carpet bomb, which we could have done right away. We've lost a lot of people by my refusal and the IDF's own mores in making sure that doesn't happen. Now, if you have the densest urban warfare theater in history, with 500 kilometers of terror tunnels underneath, 50 meters below, 50 meters above, everything booby-trapped, and you don't come in and just bomb the place to smithereens, which we didn't. I mean, we had everything booby-trapped. We moved the population out, and then you have to fight the Hamas in there. The ratios in Mosul, the ratios in Fallujah, the ratios elsewhere, there's nothing comparison, and that was nothing compared to what our brave soldiers had to face in Gaza. So, I dispute the fact. The argument that you put forward is being put forward. It doesn't make it true. What is true is that Israel is fighting these worst killers, these people who took not only beheaded our men, raped our women, and then murdered them, burned our babies alive, and took 255 hostages, which we took out. Nobody believed that we got them out. These are barbarians, and they're given a free load. I have demonstrations on behalf of Hamas. Notice that they're burning the flag of Israel and the flag of the UK.
And this is the core strategy Netanyahu keeps returning to throughout the interview. Shift the conversation from proportionality to survival. Every criticism about civilian casualties, international law, or public opinion gets reframed as a question of existential defense against barbarism and terrorism. But the problem is that global audiences are no longer judging this conflict only through Israel's security narrative. They're judging it through the images coming out of Gaza, the humanitarian crisis, and the growing perception that military justification no longer explains the scale of destruction.
the flag of Israel and the flag of America. When you have pro-Israel demonstrations, they wave Israeli flags, they wave American flags, they wave British flags. These people are against you. Whether you recognize it or not, they will sweep away your societies, your freedoms, your ideas, the values that we cherish, exactly
Prime
as you
Minister,
do.
it really isn't just extreme radicals. There are huge numbers of people who are concerned about Israel's behavior, frankly, including people like me.
Well,
Friends of Israel who
I
are
think that if Britain was invaded, forgive me, if Britain was invaded and you had the equivalent, in Britain, your population is what, 65 million, something like that, 60 million, right? So you're about 6 times our size. So if you had, on one day, about 8,000 Brits murdered, mutilated, raped, and kidnapped, and they came right next to London, what would you do? We know what you did. We know exactly what Britain did, and I don't hold Churchill or the British government or the British people who supported him responsible for saying you shouldn't act that way. You bombed the living daylights out of German cities.
What made this interview so significant wasn't just that Benjamin Netanyahu faced criticism. Israeli leaders have faced criticism for decades. What made this different was how directly the conversation centered on something Israel has historically relied on heavily: international legitimacy and public opinion. Because modern wars are no longer fought only on battlefields. They are fought through media, diplomacy, public perception, and moral credibility. And that's the deeper issue the interviewer kept pressing throughout this exchange. Netanyahu's argument is built around security and survival. He repeatedly frames Hamas as a barbaric terrorist organization responsible for October 7th hostage-taking, mass killings, and urban warfare tactics designed to maximize civilian casualties. From Israel's perspective, the war is presented as an existential fight against an armed group embedded within civilian infrastructure. And to be fair, that context matters. Hamas's attacks fundamentally reshaped Israeli public opinion and security calculations overnight. No serious analysis can ignore that reality. But the interviewer's point was different. The question was not whether Hamas committed atrocities. The question was whether Israel's military response has crossed a threshold where global audiences increasingly see it as incompatible with the values Israel claims to defend as a liberal democracy. And politically, that distinction is becoming harder for Israel to manage internationally. The Gaza war has triggered enormous backlash across Europe, universities, international institutions, human rights organizations, and increasingly within the United States itself. Younger generations in particular appear far more skeptical of unconditional Western support for Israel than previous generations were. That shift matters because long-term geopolitical alliances are heavily influenced by public sentiment over time. There's also another layer underneath this interview: credibility. Notice how Netanyahu repeatedly compares Gaza to World War II, Fallujah, Mosul, and Britain's wartime bombing campaigns. The strategy is clear: place Israel's actions inside a broader historical framework of democracies fighting brutal enemies under extreme conditions. But critics increasingly argue that those comparisons no longer resolve the moral questions being raised about civilian suffering, aid restrictions, infrastructure destruction, and the scale of humanitarian devastation. And once that moral argument starts overtaking the security argument in public consciousness, perception changes very quickly. That's why the interviewer kept returning to public opinion itself. Because governments can sustain military campaigns for long periods, but sustaining international legitimacy is much harder once the global narrative begins shifting against you. And whether someone supports Israel, supports Palestine, or feels trapped somewhere in between, one thing is undeniable: this conflict has fundamentally reshaped how large parts of the world view power, war, democracy, media, and human rights in real time. That's why this exchange resonated far beyond one interview. It reflected a much larger global fracture over morality, security, accountability, and who gets to control the narrative during modern warfare. If you want analysis that cuts through slogans and examines the deeper political, historical, and geopolitical realities underneath these global conflicts, make sure you subscribe to Pillarism, like the video, and share it with someone who values serious discussion over propaganda and outrage.